Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The tech industry, as we know, stands out for innovating and for disrupting, but it's behind the curve in one big way, how its workforce fails to reflect the overall population. So let's bring in our change agents who will tackle or have been tackling this challenge in their own way. We've got Arlan Hamilton to my left, who invests in female, minority, and LGBTQ founders through Backstage Capital, the VC fund that she founded. Christina Lewis develops and places Black and Latino young men at All-Star Code, a nonprofit that she founded. And Barbara Whye, Chief Diversity Officer and Inclusion Officer, VP of Human Resources at Intel, the world's biggest semiconductor maker. So let's get straight to the issues here. Christina, I want to start with you because when people speak of diversity, it's usually gender, women versus men. Your organization looks at another underrepresented group, which is young men of color.
Yes.
There's a specific challenge here with this group. Tell us about it.
So particularly Blacks and Latinos are underrepresented in the tech workforce, in VC-backed startups, and in computer science classes. While there is a wonderful and important ecosystem for women and girls, particularly in computer science education, there is virtually nothing focused on young men of color who are also really underserved. About only 20% of AP CS test takers are Black or Latino, which is less than half of what their population should be, and we need to ensure everyone's on the playing field. So All-Star Code teaches computer science through two main programs, a 6-week free summer intensive that teaches web development, but also an entrepreneurial mindset. We're regional in New York, Pittsburgh, and Newark, and looking to expand nationally. The second part of what we do is alumni services. Our oldest students are interning, they're in colleges, and they're working at internships at Facebook, at Goldman Sachs, at Google, and at other great companies, and we're here to help build that pipeline.
All right, so there's the training and then the placing part of your organization's mission. Arlan, Backstage's backers include some big tech names, Mark Andreessen, Chris Sacca, Aaron Levie. As an entrepreneur yourself, I'm sure that you learned plenty from your backers, but I'm curious to hear what you've taught them, what they've learned from you.
Ooh, well, yeah, so a fifth of 1% of all venture capital in 2012 to 2014 went to Black women. So start there. And getting that, letting them know that. I don't think they quite understood that to begin with. And as an outsider to Silicon Valley, I saw that was happening. And I went door to door and tried to let everyone know. And it was people like Mark Andreessen and Chris Sacca and Brad Feld who understood that pretty early on.
How do you see them implementing or acting on your message, on what you've taught them then?
It's about dollars. I see them compared to 2013 and 14. They're investing, they're writing checks into women, people of color, and LGBT founders at a greater rate, and that's what it's about.
And you're collecting dollars because you just launched a $36 million fund investing in Black female founders.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah. So those numbers are stark, and they were, while they were moving forward, which was giving us hope, they weren't moving fast enough for my taste. And so not only do we get fewer deals as Black women, we also make an average of $36,000 in one investment, compared to 1.3 million that a white male counterpart would get.
36,000 versus 1.3 million.
Yes, and so not only are we investing $36 million from going from scratch 3 years ago to this after investing in 80 plus companies, but we're going to be investing $1 million at a time because that is the shock to the system that I think the tech ecosystem needs.
All right, Barbara, let's talk about how Intel CEO Brian Krzanich 3 years ago challenged the company to make the number of female and minority employees at full representation within 5 years. What does that mean in practice?
Yes, I first would want to just give another round of applause to Arlan and the work that she's launched, because I think we really need to elevate that work. And I think what we recognize at Intel is that these are industry-wide problems. Therefore, they're going to require industry-wide solutions and industry-wide partners, because we know that 2% might be good for milk, but it's not good for African-American representation.
Word.
And I think that's the sentiment at Intel, is that we've been on this diversity and inclusion journey for some time. The CEO put that journey on steroids in 2015 with a $300 million investment. That metric that we have in Intel is around market availability, to answer your question around full representation. So what that means is that Intel intends to be at market availability for all the leadership levels that we track, technician to the C-suite, and we strive to be at market availability or higher. Now, once we hit this critical milestone, then we'll move towards population representation. But I think it's important as a company to demonstrate through performance and metrics that you can hit this first milestone, which is market availability. And since we launched this initiative, we launched it to hit it by 2020. Since then, we pulled in the goal by 2 years because we're about 84% done in terms of the improvement that we've been able to make just in 2 years.
So you're ahead of schedule.
We're actually ahead of schedule by 2 years.
All right, market availability, you use that term. It obviously depends on the pipeline, and that's where Christina comes in. Let's talk about what specifically the tech industry at large is getting right, or maybe starting to get right. Christina, you've talked about the level of awareness, how it's skyrocketed. We're starting to see data being released from companies.
As well, one of the most powerful things that companies have done is started releasing their diversity data, which only started happening a few years ago. That has really shifted the conversation for us. In 2013, when we first started, this issue was not on the map because there was no data. As far as the challenges, still in tech, we're of course looking at the early part of the pipeline. I'll tell a story about one of our two of our students. One of our students, for students to say M, he came and presented. He was interested in coding, but was went and applied on this open forum, a meetup, and really got a lot of terrible responses. People even told him he should change his name because it sounded like, because they didn't think it would work out. So he had no pathway. Fast forward after our program where he was exposed to tech culture, then got some additional prep. He's now at a really top college studying computer science. And he's at an Ivy League school and is now in a place really well positioned, of course, to have top jobs. Now take another one of our students who has a similar background and is at a good 4-year New York regional school. That student is in the computer science class and actually has had issues within the culture of computer science. No, honestly, he was trying to participate in a hackathon. He's the only African American in this group. This is in upstate New York. It's happening, and and culturally, it's not working out. No, it's not working out for him, and that is the challenge that I feel is still playing out, particularly within engineering at a lot of these different companies, and that is the challenge that we're also working on. That this is related to race and ethnicity. Both genders are involved, and I'm here looking to help bring that forward.
And Barbara, Intel obviously one of those companies releasing data, setting goals, being transparent, having the tough conversations. I know you have a number of initiatives, including a warm line program that goes beyond the usual HR services and it tries to engage with the employees in a different way. Explain how that's used.
Yes, I think what we learned early on is if we are to really achieve these diversity and inclusion goals, it can't depend solely on hiring. I think that's a natural place for people to start to think that they can hire their way out of this diversity and inclusion work. At Intel, we learned is hiring, it's progression, but it's also retention. And so the Achilles heel for us was around retention. So we set out to try and find really an innovative way to get in front of the exit interviews. Because at the point of the exit interviews, you've lost the employee, and it's far too down, as she's saying, down the pipeline at that point. Plus, you don't really get real data. So in the exit interviews, because we aim to be professional, we don't want to burn any bridges, you don't really get the kernel of truth about why employees are leaving.
They're just walking out the door.
Yeah,
they
may say, hey, I need to go take care of my grandmom. She lives on the East Coast. When in reality, you're taking a job on the East Coast, right? That's the politeness of us, and I get that. So what Intel did was we implemented a very innovative warm line service. And we think of really retention as a bank. Everyday employees come into your companies, my company. It's transactional in many cases. And a transaction can put a deposit in the bank or it can take out from the bank. And when an employee is close to insufficient funds, let's just say, that is at the moment where in Intel they call the warm line. So this service has been in place for about 2 years. We've had 10,000 employees that have utilized the warm line. But the key is we've been able to save 90% of those employees because they have a safe place to have real conversation about what's getting in the way of them retaining. And on the other side, it's just given us a source of predictive analytics that can help us drive really proactive solutions. So all of a sudden now I can say my top 2 issues are managers and also progression. Therefore, as the diversity and inclusion officer with my leadership team, we can then put in place really solid solutions to try and help employees through that. I can also tell you if the challenges are in a certain business unit, a certain business manager, and it just brings so much rich data for us to really act upon.
You're basically talking the language that the executives understand, which is data-driven.
Exactly. And in an engineering culture like Intel, where 85,000 of our 107,000 employees are engineers, you need data.
All right. Well, in terms of talking a language that people can understand, Arlan, you've talked about how anecdotally there's increasing awareness and recognition of the problem that the industry isn't diverse enough. You get passing comments from, say, white men about the industry and the changes much more so than you did 5 years ago.
Yes, that's true. I noticed at a recent major conference that I went to that I was on stage and I said my piece pretty colorfully, and afterwards, throughout the entire week, more white men came up to me saying that they felt they understood and that they were enjoying listening to that message than I have experienced in any other time with this message and with this fund. So to me, that was just in March, and that seemed like a really interesting turn of events. And it's, you know, we can't all be siloed. We have to work together on this. So it is important that they're getting this. I think there's also some really awesome nonprofit work that's being done in venture capital. Project Include, Ellen Powell's nonprofit, All Raise, women VCs. There's Code 2040 and there's Culture Shift Labs. And I think, you know, it's important to recognize that while this is I will say that our fund, our $36 million fund, is groundbreaking and it's history making. It's also not enough. So there needs to be other people that come to the plate and you know, invest alongside us.
All right, so I want to move on to it's still not enough, because specifically there are areas where the tech community, the tech industry is still falling short. And Arlan, I know that you say stereotypes persist. There's still this stereotype of hungry children in Africa and people looking through that prism. Talk about that a little bit and how that remains a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, so Backstage Capital, we've seen 3,000 companies, and 98% of them were led by women, people of color, LGBT, and we've invested in about 90 at this point over the last 3 years. And I think the conversation still that surprises me is when I go in and I talk to other investors across the country about our portfolio or about our pipeline and deal flow. It still has this kind of connotation of, oh, we're doing this diversity fund, so it's all for the heartstrings. It's all nice, and there are like Ivy League, there are PhDs in our portfolio. There are people who are. I mean, I was in a room with half of them in March, and I looked around and I was like, oh, okay, there's everyone else in this room is smarter than I am. So these are people working on things that are going to change the world and that importantly are going to affect the world. It's not just people creating, you shouldn't look at it as if you're a white man and you have investment dollars, I think it would be short-sighted to think of founders of color, especially as only creating for their market. Because if I hear one more time, I don't understand the market, when the market is the world, I may lose my mind.
Yeah. Well said, Barbara.
Yeah, so I just think that if we really want to tackle the representation challenges, whether it's in VCs or tech, Congress, gender dynamics, we really have to confront the social and the cultural attitudes that we're all bringing to the table. So there's recent research. I'm actually working on a PhD in tech and inequality at ASU. And some research from Sarah Jane Leslie actually shows that by the time a kid reaches 6 years old, they're already equating brilliance as equal to men. So I think all of us have a role to play in that, and we have to really confront that attitude, because it shows up in tech for me in the mature season in terms of the lack of diverse talent in tech, but it starts probably as early as the doctor announces it's a girl, or it's a black girl, or it's a black boy. So we have to confront those narratives, not only in tech, but outside of tech, if we are really going to be purposeful in achieving some of this representation. Now, we too launched a $125 million VC fund, really aiming at these same problems, Intel Capital, to really try and increase the diversity and the representation in VC for women, LGBTQ, as well as veterans. And I think one company, one partnership can't solve these things. We also have a role to play in our narratives, and also that when we see individuals, we see them for who they are and not the skin that they're in.
Right. Going beyond the imagery and the stereotypes that have persisted for so long. Christina, you're in a different position from Intel and Backstage in that you're a nonprofit and you depend on corporate gifts, on corporate giving. Companies in technology, as you've observed to me, are not as philanthropic as, say, companies in telecom or finance. Talk a little bit about that and what it means for your organization.
Yes, it's true. I love what Arlan said, and she's focused on dollars. And as you look at education organizations, charity, philanthropy really is the way to, to increase pipeline. And I would encourage all companies, particularly technology companies, to look at their philanthropy, and particularly to the actual dollars that they're willing to put in and invest into nonprofit organizations.
Let me interrupt you for a second, though, because Mark Zuckerberg, Mark Benioff, Jeff Bezos, they'll all say, but we have a foundation. I have a family foundation. We do all those things.
Yes, and that is the culture in tech, I think, started right by Hewlett-Packard, who went as founders and started their own private charitable organizations, rather than, as opposed to investing in a corporate philanthropy within those companies themselves. So we found overall in the industry that the actual corporations out in the Valley are much less used to philanthropic giving than, say, finance, media, telecom, the companies that we see here. I believe that you can look at many large technology companies, for instance, Apple, which did not even have a philanthropy under Steve Jobs.
All right.
So I do believe Tim Cook has changed that, and so it's shifting. We'd really like to see more.
Let's get final thoughts now. Change is obviously happening, and it's already happening. So the question now is, how do users of technology, consumers of technology, keep that change going? What's one thing ordinary people can do to push tech companies or the industry to be accountable for their promise to be more inclusive? I'd like to get an idea from each of you. It doesn't have to be long. We only have about a minute and a half left. Barbara, why don't we start with you?
So I think the key for us at Intel is all about performance and holding ourselves accountable. And we include our metrics as a part of our annual performance bonuses. So again, I'm 8 of 8 kids, and I grew up in a home where you're measured by what is done, not by what you say. So I think where we can drive accountability as industry leaders on what is actually getting done and make sure that's linked to the pay, we'll have a better chance of moving the needle.
Arlan?
I would say, talk with your money. Spend where you see great initiatives happening, and don't where you see issues.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
Christina?
Well, for everyone, being aware of the dynamics here of racial and ethnic diversity, as well as gender diversity and also class diversity, really is important. I'd like to see in these computer science classrooms around the country the actually valuing each group and showing that that all groups need to be brought to the table and be inclusive.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining us today. Arlan Hamilton, Christina Lewis, and Barbara Whye.
Thank you.